I don't think I can ever forgive my father. Growing up F28, had a great relationship with my dad. He was my stepfather, but our family was blended well in that aspect where we did not use the term step and there was no contention over that. There were other issues that nobody knew about at the time, though that's not really relevant to this story. My second earliest memory is my parents sitting me down and telling me that I could call my father dad if I wanted to. From that day on, he was my dad. We did everything together. There was a 5-year age gap between my brother and I. So while he was going through his teen years, I was still young enough to want to do everything with my parents. My mom, while not a bad parent, was kind of absentee. It wasn't that she wasn't around, but she always had to be doing something. She never wanted to sit at home, but my dad was more than content to let me tag along wherever he was going. We went everywhere together for the most part. His friends all knew me, and I'd regularly attend dinner parties and the like with them, as I wasn't old enough to be home alone, and even if I was, I wouldn't want to stay home with my brother for good reason. All this to say that growing up I was closer to my dad than my mom. He was my hero. I looked up to him and I wanted to be just like him when I grew up. I thought that man walked on water. He and my mom had what I thought was a fairy tale relationship. They were what I wanted in a future with my partner. They never argued. The one time they did argue was such a surprise that we were worried our parents would get divorced because it never happened. I guess that was the first time he showed that he could be sneaky and lie so easily. Though chronologically the reason I can't forgive him happened before this. This is just how things played out from my perspective. Anyway, he sent us to visit my grandparents across the country for the entire summer. He'd originally planned to come with us but then couldn't get off work, that's what he claimed anyway. When we got back, things seemed fine until we went to a family gathering and someone made a comment about my dad's cancer treatment. Cancer we had no idea about. He sent us away without telling us while he got treatment and suffered alone. My mom was pissed, and now as a married woman I would be shattered if my husband didn't feel like he could turn to me for support in a situation like that. Things continued on from that after the anger cooled down and we continued life as normal. I wasn't a perfect child and my dad and I fought. I'm not saying that there were never any situations where we were angry with each other, but he was always there when I needed him. When I got pregnant as a teenager, he was so angry at me, but he was there to hold my hand in the delivery room. He hated that I got married right out of high school, but he was there to walk me down the aisle. He hated that I moved 8 hours away by car, but he was there for my daughter's 2nd birthday. That was when he confided to my mom that he was wrong because he realized when he visited how happy my little family was. He hated that I ended up moving overseas, but he was there to FaceTime me almost every night. He got sick not long before my daughter was born. We all knew about it from the beginning this time. Though there was no way for him to hide it this time even if he wanted to. I was there in the car with him when he suddenly started getting horrible back pain that wouldn't go away. He ended up having my mom take him to the hospital after she got off work. He was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease that was attacking his kidneys. I can't remember the exact name right now, but he was on chemo for the last few years of his life. He never showed how bad it was and always took longer to accept doctor's orders when it came to mobility aids. In the end, he was using a cane even though the doctor told him he really needed a walker. He was a stubborn man like that. I was the last person to talk to him before he died. I regret how the conversation went so much now. Not because we argued or ended the call on bad terms, but because it was mostly like every call we ever had. He was so tired. He was falling asleep on the phone. Even now, when my view of him has changed, I still wish I had stayed on the phone longer with him. Instead, I told him it was okay if he wanted to go to bed. I told him he could just call us later. The next morning I got a call from his phone, and it was really early in the morning, back home 3 or 4 in the morning. I just assumed he woke up early since he went to bed early, but instead it was my mother calling to give me the news that my dad had passed in his sleep. My husband and I made arrangements to travel back home for the funeral and to be there with my mom. It was after the funeral that she told me something that changed my view of my dad. She went to get things figured out with the mortgage company. It's important to note that while the home had been in my dad's family for generations, he and my mom bought it when they were already married. So the mortgage was taken out after they were married. When she went to get the paperwork figured out, they told her that she wasn't on the mortgage. She didn't think that could be right because while she didn't actually go to the meetings to purchase the house, she signed all the paperwork my dad brought home to put her name on the mortgage/deed. What he really had her sign was forms forfeiting her right to any claims on the house. So she had no legal right to the home at all. My brother refused to do anything to help with the situation. He couldn't accept the house as legal next of kin because he would lose his benefits. So instead he refused to help or sign anything at all. Since my mom signed that paper, she wasn't even entitled to half the house like she would have been under the state inheritance laws. I can understand why he did it at the time, but he was so sneaky about it, and I think that was so wrong. At the time he was the only one working. He'd lost a lot in the divorce he had with my brother's bio mom. He was afraid of losing the house if anything happened between him and my mom. What I cannot forgive is that he knew he was dying. He knew for years that he wouldn't get better but didn't try to fix what he had done. He could have came clean and admitted to what he'd done, but instead he just did nothing. My childhood home was foreclosed on because my brother refused to do anything about it, and my mom had no access to any of the information and she didn't have the money to buy it outright. I feel like the way I saw my dad has changed now. While I still love him, my view of him has tarnished a bit. The more I look on the past, the more moments I realize showed that he wasn't really the man I thought he was. I'll never get that back and it devastates me.